My name is Captain Nostalgia, and continuing on our press coverage of this year's Fantasia Fest, I'm here to talk about the documentary, Satan Wants You. This documentary explores the rise and fall of the 1980s, and even somewhat of a lesser degree into the 1990s, of the phenomenon known as Satanic Panic that all started with Michelle Remembers. Now, if you guys don't know the history behind the Satanic Panic, first off, this is a great documentary as an intro point to that period of history. So it's also worth mentioning that the memoir which inspired the film, the aforementioned Michelle Remembers, was written in 1980 by a woman named Michelle Smith and her psychologist, Dr. Lawrence Pazder. I probably mispronounced that name, and if I did, I am sorry. Basically, this is a tell-all book where Michelle recounts repressed memories of being tortured by a satanic cult at the age of 5 in the mid-50s. If you guys are fans of the podcast that myself and Mark, my co-host, called the Bizgazing co-host, where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health, I have shared time and time again about my history with Christianity and being a Christian. And honestly, I gotta say that this documentary is such a fascinating look as a Christian in particular, and maybe this is just myself as a niche audience watching this, but I think it's interesting to talk about because a lot of Christians during this time remember kind of the revival days of Billy Graham and kind of this explosion of televangelists on the 80s. I've talked about it in the past with the eyes of Tammy Faye, so on and so forth. And this is a great juxtaposition to some of those documentaries and other films that really kind of explores this really worldwide phenomenon that really happened in the 80s. Like the story behind Satanic Panic, Michelle Remembers, the McMartin case, all of these things are chronicled in this documentary super well, I might add. This documentary is so bonkers, the way that the directors kind of just put everything together in terms of the timeline of not only the two subjects with Smith and Pazder, but also how their story kind of was this chain reaction, this linchpin that really created this entire worldwide panic around satanic cults and other religions outside of Christianity. One of the most heartbreaking things, obviously, about this is not only the McMartin case and kind of those that were involved in that entire scandal, but also at the same time, kind of the back end of this entire crazy period of history. I love that this documentary spans decades to tell this story, and it's not just these two subjects, but it's kind of showcasing their family history, how the events kind of impacted the families and those close to both Smith and Pazder, how the FBI got involved, how there was like a new terminology that was kind of birthed as a result of this book. And even from a filmmaking standpoint, I love the way this movie looks. Like every person that is interviewed in this feels like their stories are being told through this really Gothic era lens. Like the lighting of this entire thing is just, the subject is like front and center, which was really nice to kind of see. Even when it pivots to a different camera, they're still front and center. You have kind of like this, you can see the room around them, and then that light just slowly starts to fade. I really thought that that visual representation was such a beautiful and great way to really kind of be a juxtapose kind of the mood and the themes of the film as a whole. Directors Stephen J. Adams and Sean Horlor have such a great juxtaposition when it comes to the visualization of this with the interviews, but also the lighting and just how technical everything looks from a re-dramatized version of it. Like I'm sure you've seen it on like Netflix documentaries or travel TV or just a number of other things where you'll have the subjects talking or people that knew the subjects of the film of which you're doing, and then you'll have shadow actors kind of recreate the events that they're talking about. And honestly, the lighting and just the cinematography and how everything like that comes together is really impactful to the larger story and narrative that these two directors are telling. I want to shout out the film's cinematographer, Blake Davey. I think they do an incredible job at making this film feel really atmospheric and immersive while you're watching this archival footage. And this movie just looks way better than it has any credit to be. This movie's really engaging too. I think the directors did a great job at showcasing how broad this thing really was. Like, they have people talking about this phenomenon that I'd never ever expect to hear about it. Like, I didn't know, like, Gerardo Riviera, I don't know if I said his name right, but he did like a 3-hour special. It aired on it. Oprah one time did a deep dive documentary on it, and it just kind of showcases how like deep into the zeitgeist this thing actually was. I loved how it really conveyed a lot of the emotional weight of those involved and kind of how this really affected them, how this affected the FBI, and like talking with other people in terms of like how this affected also the Church of Satan, which was fascinating to see. Sociologists weighing in on this and FBI weighing in this, and like just different people and different perspectives, and just how they analyzed everything and kind of gave their 2 cents. Sometimes a well-balanced documentary is not always what I think is really hard to do. I think this film does a great job at kind of showcasing that. And on top of that, I think if I had one other thing to say about this documentary that I would have wished for it, there's so much that this documentary covers, but when you kind of talk about the narrative of the 1980s satanic panic, the McMartin case always gets brought up. And I feel like this film touches on it very briefly, but doesn't kind of dive into it. This is a film that really kind of focuses on the people that started this entire thing with Michelle Smith and Dr. Lawrence Fetzer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this through the Rorschach rating scale. Even though I only have one super small complaint, I'm going to go ahead and give Satan Wants You a 5 out of 5. This is a fascinating documentary, and I cannot recommend this movie enough just for education purposes and kind of really see just the impact that media can have on us. When it comes to mental health, conversations that we have on this channel, when it comes to documentaries in particular, I typically will not dive deep into mental health or talk about it at all. And I feel like this one warrants just a little bit of a conversation about the impact that media can really have on the mental health and the mental health of those around us. Because this documentary is really heartbreaking when you hear the stories of not only the Catholic Church's tie to the Michelle Remembers phenomenon, but also at the same time, all of those affected by the satanic panic, especially those with the McMartin case being the most famous, but also other, elementary school teachers and workers that were with kids and all of these other institutions, how they were affected by it. Bottom line, the media has a bigger hold on our mental health than I think we sometimes can realize. It's really what we do with our relationship to media and how we allow it to affect our mental health. And that really, at the end of the day, really matters. I'll be really honest with you guys. I have been in a relationship with the horror genre long enough to know that there are days where I just mentally cannot be around that stuff because I know that it's harmful for my mental health sometimes. The inclusion of violence and sex and vulgarity, and I just need to watch something really mind-numbing, and so I tend to go for films that I grew up on that just kind of bring me back to a simpler time. And it's because I've been with this long enough to understand and realize that I have a deep rooted relationship with the media that I consume. And I think to a degree, we all do. Whether we want to admit it or not, there are definite ties that when we consume certain media, it has an effect on us mentally and emotionally. And this film is a great example of the dangers of that warning sign. I think Adams and Horlor do an incredible job with this documentary at really capturing that relationship between emotional health and mental health, as well as what we're and how we're consuming media on a daily basis. To the fact that the majority of the events of this documentary took place during the rise of talk shows and 24-hour news coverage. So I just want to kind of leave you with this question: how has media been affecting your mental health recently? In the show notes below, you guys will find links to our mental health resource library. If you're currently watching this and struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, depression, or anxiety, we ask you guys to consider our resources down there below. Satan Wants You is currently making its festival run, much like some of the other films that we've talked about this year for Fantasia Fest, but it is expected to have a theatrical and VOD release relatively soon. Make sure that you guys follow us so that you guys can find not only more films from this year's Fantasia Fest, but also find, if you guys are interested in seeing Satan Wants You and any other films we've covered this year, to make sure you guys follow us on social medias. Links are going to be in the show notes below, along with that subscribe button below. So until next time, stay classy.